There is a place in northern Arizona where the land itself seems to be keeping a secret. 3 mazes of red and gold stone, rising out of the desert like the spines of something ancient and half buried in the earth. The Hopi have lived here for more than 1,000 years, longer than almost any other people on the North American continent. And for most of that time, they have carried a set of prophecies, warnings, really, about how this world ends and about who comes back when it does. Most people have never heard these prophecies. The few who have usually know only the sanitized version, the one fit for a magazine article, or a documentary that wraps everything up neatly in 40 minutes and sends you to bed feeling like you learned something. But there is another version, a darker one. And according to a story that has circulated quietly for decades, part of what the Hopi elders said was written down in 1961 and then never released, a record that was made and then withheld. However, I have to pause here for a second, because what I just described, that is one case from a much larger pattern. There are 35 documented cases in a document I put together. Different cities, different decades, different types of evidence. Every single one follows the same sequence: discovered, documented, acquired, disappeared. I could not fit all of it into a video. It's in the pinned comment below. Find it before we continue. The reason it was supposedly withheld is not what you would expect, because if you follow this thread all the way to the end, it stops being a story about a small tribe in the desert. It becomes a story about a civilization that once covered the entire planet. A civilization that, according to the people who study this, was scrubbed out of the history books on purpose. And the Hopi, sitting up on their mesas, may have been among the last people left alive who still remembered it was ever there. This is the story of what the Hopi said about the ones who return at the end, and why, for more than 60 years, someone seems to have decided you were not supposed to hear it. To understand any of this, you have to start with the Hopi themselves, and with a word they hold sacred, Pahana, sometimes written Bahana. In the simplest translation, it means the lost white brother. But the simple translation misses almost everything that matters. The Hopi believe that we are not living in the first world, we are living in the fourth. 3 worlds came before this one, and each of them was destroyed. The first by fire, the second by ice, the third by a great flood that swallowed everything. Each time the world ended, a small number of people were judged worthy to survive and carry on into the next age, and each time, at the beginning of the new world, something specific happened. The people were divided. According to the tradition, at the dawn of this 4th world, 2 brothers stood together at a place of emergence. They were given a sacred stone tablet, and then that tablet was broken in 2. One brother, the one the Hopi would come to call Pahana, took his piece and travelled east toward the rising sun. The other brother stayed behind and settled the land that would become the Hopi mesas, and the agreement between them was this: one day, at the end of the 4th world, when things had gone as wrong as they could possibly go, the lost brother would return. He would come back from the east carrying his half of the tablet, and when the 2 pieces were fit together, the truth of everything would be made whole again. Now, sit with that for a second, because this is not a vague, feel-good spiritual idea. It is unusually specific. A people separated at the beginning of an age. A physical object broken into pieces and carried in 2 directions. A promise that at the very end, the missing half comes back, and the full picture is finally restored. The Hopi were not just waiting for a savior. They were waiting for a piece of missing information, a record that had been carried away and would one day be carried home. And here is where the story starts to turn, because the Hopi say the lost brother did not just take a stone, he took knowledge, he took the memory of what the world had actually been like before the division, and the brother who stayed behind was left to guard the land and wait, holding his half of a truth he could not complete on his own. For centuries, the Hopi watched the eastern horizon. When the Spanish arrived in the 1500s, some Hopi genuinely wondered if the pale strangers on horseback were the returning Pahana, finally coming home with the missing half of the tablet. But there was a test. The true Pahana would be able to produce his piece of the stone, and it would match. The Spanish could not. They brought crosses and swords and demands for gold, but they carried no tablet, and the fit was wrong, so the Hopi concluded these were not the ones. Not the real return. just imitations wearing the face of the thing they were promised. There is one more detail about that stone that matters. The Hopi say the tablet held by the people who stayed behind was missing a corner. A piece had been deliberately broken off and given to the departing brother to carry east. So the test was never just whether a stranger arrived from the right direction, saying the right things. The test was physical. The returning Pahana would arrive holding that missing corner, and when it was set against the tablet the Hopi had guarded for 1,000 years, the broken edges would fit perfectly, and the stone would be whole again. You could not fake that. You could not talk your way past it. Either the corner matched, or it did not. And in every arrival across 5 centuries, the corner never matched. They were not waiting for a feeling, or a leader, or a promise dressed up in fine words. They were waiting for a physical record that could be checked, edge, against the one they already held in their hands. That pattern would repeat again and again across the centuries. Strangers arriving from the east, claiming authority, claiming to be the future. And every time, the Hopi elders looked for the tablet, and every time, the fit was wrong. Which raises the obvious question. If all of them were imitations, then who exactly were the elders still waiting for? And what did they think that real return would actually look like? That brings us to 1961. By the middle of the 20th century, something had shifted among the Hopi. The elders were old. The younger generation was leaving the mesas for cities and jobs and a world of automobiles and television. And there was a growing fear among the keepers of the prophecies that the old knowledge was about to die with the last men who held it. So a decision was made. For the first time in Hopi history, some of the elders agreed to let the prophecies be recorded, written down, spoken into machines, preserved before the memory vanished for good. This is not conspiracy. This is documented history. In the late 1950s and early 1960s, a writer named Frank Waters spent an enormous amount of time with Hopi elders and interpreters, gathering their oral traditions. That work became a book, published in 1963, that laid out the Hopi creation story and the prophecies in more detail than the outside world had ever seen. Recordings were made, interpreters translated, elders who had guarded this material their entire lives finally let it out into the open air. But here is the claim that has followed this project like a shadow ever since. Not everything that was recorded made it into the book. According to the story, during those sessions around 1961, certain elders spoke about the return, about the ones who come back at the end, in a way that was considered too specific, too dangerous. Names of things that should not have names, descriptions of events, and of a hidden history that did not fit anything in the accepted account of the world. And that material, the story goes, was set aside, held back, left out of the published version and quietly filed away. Now, I want to be honest with you about what we can prove and what we cannot. We can prove the recordings happened. We can prove the book exists. What we cannot prove, at least not with a document you could hold in your hands, is exactly what was left out. The people who insist a record was withheld cannot show you the withheld record, because that is the entire nature of the claim. But they can point to something strange. Because when you line up what the Hopi did say publicly with a completely separate theory that has nothing to do with Arizona, the two stories start to describe the same thing. And that theory is where this gets genuinely unsettling. It is called Tartaria. If you have never heard the word, here is the short version. Tartaria is the name given by a growing community of researchers to what they believe was a vast, technologically advanced, globally connected civilization that existed just a few centuries ago and was then systematically erased from the historical record. Not ancient, not tens of thousands of years back, recent, close enough that its buildings, according to the theory, are still standing all around us, hiding in plain sight, wrongly credited to the wrong people and the wrong centuries. The believers point to the grand architecture that appears, almost identically, in old photographs of cities on every continent. The same ornate stonework, the same domes and arches and star-shaped forts, the same impossible cathedrals in places that supposedly had no wealth, no population, and no engineering to build them. They point to the world's fairs of the 18 and 1900s, where enormous, elaborate palaces of white stone were photographed by the thousands, celebrated for a single season, and then, we are told, torn down and thrown away as if they were nothing. They ask a simple, uncomfortable question: who really built all of this? And why does the official story keep changing to explain it away? And this is the part that matters for our story, because the Tartaria theory is not really about buildings. At its core, it is about economics. It is a revision of who actually held the wealth, the technology, and the power on this planet, and how that entire arrangement was quietly transferred to someone else. The theory claims there was a reset, a deliberate break in the historical record where an old order of the world was ended, its accomplishments reassigned, its memory buried, and a new story written on top of the ruins. The people alive at the time either did not survive the transition, or survived it with their memories wiped, wandering through the leftover buildings of a civilization they no longer recognized as their own. The researchers have a name for the mechanism of that erasure. They call it the reset, and some of them describe it in terms of a great inundation of mud and ruin that buried the lower floors of the old buildings, which is why, they argue, so many grand structures around the world appear to have windows and doorways sunk halfway underground, as if the street itself rose up to swallow them. Whether or not you accept that image, the economic argument underneath it is the part that gives people chills. Because a civilization does not simply vanish, its wealth goes somewhere. Its buildings get new owners. Its inventions get new inventors, credited to new names in new decades. And its people, the survivors of whatever the reset actually was, have to be explained. The theory points to the strange waves of orphaned children moved across continents in the 1800s, to census records that seem not to add up, to entire cities that appear in old maps and paintings fully formed, as though someone inherited them rather than built them. The claim is not simply that people died. The claim is that people were relocated, renamed, and handed a fresh story about who they were and where everything around them had come from. A whole world repossessed, and its former owners walking through the halls as strangers. That is the economic engine the Tartaria researchers believe they are looking at. And it is, almost word for word, the condition the Hopi describe at the end of a world: survivors, holding fragments, unable to remember the whole. Sound familiar? Because the Hopi have a word for that too. They call it the end of a world, and they have said over and over that it has happened 3 times before, and that each time the survivors carried forward only fragments of what came before. Broken pieces of a whole they could no longer assemble. Now put the 2 halves of the tablet together, and watch what happens. The Hopi say the world has ended and restarted more than once, and that each time the true history was divided and scattered. The Tartaria researchers say the world was reset, and the true history was divided, scattered, and rewritten. The Hopi say a brother left at the beginning, carrying the missing half of the record toward the east. The Tartaria theory describes a lost civilization whose knowledge was carried off and hidden by whoever engineered the reset. The Hopi say that at the end of this 4th world, the lost brother returns, the 2 pieces are joined, and the full truth is finally revealed. The believers say that we are living in the exact moment when the erased history is starting to resurface, when the old photographs are being dug up, when the buildings are being questioned, when the missing half is coming back into view, the ones who return at the end. In one telling, they are the lost brother of a desert prophecy. In the other, they are the resurfacing memory of a civilization that was stolen from the human race. But they are pointing at the same event. The moment the record becomes whole again. And that, according to the people who chase this, is exactly what the 1961 material was really about. Not vague spirituality, a specific claim that the Hopi elders knew the current version of history was false, that they had guarded, across 4 worlds, the memory that something enormous had been taken and buried, and that when they finally agreed to speak it into a recorder, the part that named this too clearly, the part that lined up too neatly with a truth someone did not want examined, was the part that never made it out of the room. But let me slow down here, because it would be easy to run away with this. And the honest version of the story is more interesting than the hype. Here is what is solidly documented. The Hopi prophecies do describe a series of signs that would appear before the end of the 4th world, and when you read them, the specificity is genuinely strange. The elders spoke of a time when the people would travel through the sky in carriages. Before I go further, that document in the pinned comment. If you have not found it yet, go there now, because everything I cover in these videos is one piece of a pattern that only becomes visible when you see all 35 cases together. The document shows you the full pattern. What I can show you here is the surface. What is down there is everything underneath it. Pinned comment, now, then come back. When a spider's web would be spun back and forth across the land, when the sea would turn black and many living things would die because of it, when the young would grow their hair long like the tribes of old and refuse the ways of their fathers. The believers read these as roads and airplanes, as power lines and telephone wires stretching horizon to horizon, as oil spills blackening the ocean, as the counterculture of the 1960s arriving right on schedule. Whether you accept those readings or not, the words themselves are old, and they were written down before most of what they seem to describe had fully come to pass. There is a rock near the old village of Oraibi, one of the oldest continuously inhabited settlements in North America, that makes all of this harder to wave away. Carved into its face is a diagram the Hopi call the map of the future. It shows a great figure, and two lines running away from it, one above the other. The upper line is the path of the outside world. The path of technology, of endless taking, of a people who have cut themselves off from the earth and from the natural law. That line, on the rock, runs straight for a while and then breaks apart into a jagged, chaotic zigzag before ending. It simply goes nowhere. The lower line is the path of the Hopi, the path of balance, of staying rooted to the land, of remembering. It runs steady and unbroken, and near the end, a small connecting line joins the two paths, as if offering one last chance to cross over from the doomed road, the surviving one, before the upper line shatters for good. The elders say we are near the place on the rock where the two paths finally split apart, where the choice can no longer be put off, and they carved that warning into stone long before there was any outside world close enough to read it. And then there is the 9th sign, the last one. The elders said the 9th and final sign would be a dwelling place in the heavens, above the earth, that would fall with a great crash, and it would appear as a blue star. After the blue star, they said, the ceremonies of the Hopi would cease, and the 4th world would come to its end. The arrival of the 5th would begin. They gave it a name, Sakwasoha, the blue star Kachina, a spirit that, at the very end, would remove its mask in the public plaza, in front of the children, in front of everyone. And the removing of the mask is the key detail, because in Hopi ceremony, the mask is never removed in public. To pull it off in the open, in front of the uninitiated, is to break the deepest rule there is. It means the age of secrets is over. It means the hidden thing is about to be shown to everyone, whether the world is ready or not. Think about what that image is actually describing. The end of the 4th world does not arrive, in this telling, as fire from the sky or water over the mountains. It arrives as a revelation, as a mask coming off, as a secret that was kept for the entire length of an age, finally exposed in the open square where no one can look away. The Hopi did not just prophesy a disaster, they prophesied a disclosure. And that is why the story of the Withheld 1961 record has such a grip on people. Because if the central prophecy is about a hidden truth being revealed at the end of the age, then a hidden recording, held back from the public for 60 years, is not a contradiction of the prophecy. It is the prophecy, it is the mask, still on, the secret still kept, the revelation delayed. So let me tell you about the man who spent his life trying to take the mask off. His name was Thomas Banyacya, and he was not a fringe figure inventing stories in his kitchen. In 1948, 4 Hopi elders selected Banyacya and a small group of others to carry the Hopi message to the outside world. This was a formal appointment made by the traditional leadership for a specific purpose. The elders believed the time described in the prophecies was approaching, and they wanted the warning delivered to the leaders of the wider world before it was too late. Banyacya was chosen partly because he spoke English, and he took the assignment as a sacred duty that would consume the rest of his life. For decades, he tried. He requested to speak at the United Nations, believing the Hopi were prophetically instructed to deliver their message to a great house of mica, a house of glass, standing on the eastern shore of the land. To the Hopi, the glass towers of the UN headquarters in New York looked like exactly that. He was turned away, and turned away, and turned away again. The message he was carrying did not fit the agenda of the powerful, and the doors stayed shut for most of his life. Finally, in 1992, decades after he was first appointed, Thomas Banyacya was allowed to address the United Nations General Assembly. He was an old man by then, and he stood in that chamber and delivered the Hopi warning to the assembled representatives of the world's nations. He spoke of the prophecies. He spoke of the world being out of balance. He spoke of a purification that was coming. And by many accounts, the chamber was nearly empty. Most of the delegates had already left for the day. The man who had spent 44 years trying to deliver a message across 4 worlds finally got his moment, and the room he had been told to reach had mostly gone home. Let that image sit for a second, because it tells you something about how warnings work in this world. The mask stays on, not always because of a grand conspiracy in a locked vault. Sometimes because the people who could listen simply choose not to be in the room, but the believers push it further than that. They say Banyacya's struggle, the closed doors, the empty chamber, was not an accident of scheduling. It was the same force that withheld the 1,961 record. The same instinct that, in the Tartaria theory, erased an entire civilization from memory. A consistent, patient effort to keep the 2 halves of the tablet from ever fitting together. Because the moment they fit, the official story of the world, the one that says our history runs in a straight, tidy line from primitive to modern, would shatter. And a great deal of power is built on top of that straight, tidy line. This is where the economic layer of the story comes back into focus, and where it stops feeling like folklore and starts feeling like a motive. Ask yourself who benefits from a version of history in which nothing of great value existed before the current order, in which the grand buildings were all built by the people we are told built them. In the centuries we are told they were built, funded by economies that, on paper, could barely feed themselves. Ask who benefits from a world that cannot remember being wealthier, more capable, or more connected than it is now. A people with no memory of having owned something does not ask for it back. A people who cannot remember being robbed does not go looking for the thief. That is the quiet, uncomfortable core of both stories. The Hopi say the truth was divided and hidden. The Tartaria researchers say the truth was stolen and rewritten. And in both cases, the theft only works if the victim forgets it ever happened. The whole system depends on the mask staying on the record staying withheld, on the lost brother never quite making it home. The Hopi have their own word for what comes when the mask finally does come off. They call it the Great Purification. It is not, in their telling, a punishment handed down by an angry god. It is more like a correction, a rebalancing of a world that has tilted so far out of true that it can no longer stand on its own. The elders described it as a time of shaking, when the false structures fall and the people are sorted, not by wealth or power, but by whether they still remembered how to live in balance. And the ones who carried the truth quietly through the long, dark centuries, the ones who kept their half of the tablets safe while everyone else forgot they were ever holding anything, those are the ones who walk through the purification into whatever comes next. The Hopi never claimed to be special because of blood. They claimed to be special because they remembered. That was their whole assignment. Stay on the mesas, keep the ceremonies, hold the memory, and wait for the other half to come home. For more than 1,000 years, against nearly every pressure the outside world could throw at them, that is exactly what they did. So what did the withheld records supposedly say? Here we are firmly in the territory of claim rather than proof, and I'm going to tell it to you as a claim, because that is what it is. The story is that in those 1961 sessions, one of the elders described the return of the lost brother in terms that did not sound like myth at all. That he described it not as a man walking out of the eastern desert, but as the return of knowledge itself. A moment when the true record of the world, the account of what was really built and by whom and where it all went, would come back into human hands all at once. Through the very machines the Hopi were suspicious of, through the spider's web spun across the land, through images and records surfacing everywhere at the same time, impossible to bury any longer. The elder is said to have called it not the end of the world, but the end of the lie about the world. And that phrasing, true or invented, is why the story refuses to die. because it reframes everything. The blue star is not a comet. It is the flash of the truth going public. The removed mask is not a costume. It is the exposure of the hidden economy of history. And the ones who return at the end are not aliens or angels or a savior on a horse. They are us, the living, finally remembering what we were never supposed to remember. Now, I have tried to walk the honest ladder through all of this, and I owe you the honest ending too. There is no verified vault with a labeled tape inside it that proves the 1961 record was deliberately suppressed. The Hopi prophecies are real and documented, but they are also oral tradition, filtered through interpreters and outside writers, and reasonable people argue about how much was shaped in translation. The Tartaria theory is a genuine, growing movement, but mainstream historians reject it, and they have detailed, ordinary explanations for the buildings and the photographs and the demolished fairgrounds. You are not required to believe any single link in this chain, but you are allowed to notice the shape of it, a people who insist the world has ended before and left us with only broken fragments of the truth. A prophecy built around a physical record, carried away and promised to return. A moment of revelation at the end of the age, described as a mask coming off in public. A separate theory, arising completely independently, describing a hidden history and a stolen economy, resurfacing right now, in our lifetimes, through exactly the technology the elders warned about. Two halves of a tablet, made in different centuries by people who never met, and yet when you hold them up to the light, the broken edges seem to match. Maybe that is a coincidence. Maybe the human mind is just very good at finding patterns in the dark and stitching unrelated stories into one because the stitched version is more satisfying than the loose ends. That is a real possibility, and an honest person keeps it on the table. But there is another possibility, and it is the one the Hopi themselves seem to have believed, that some truths are too large to be kept by any one people in any one age, that they get broken apart and carried in different directions, and hidden inside myth and stone and old photographs and warnings that no one in power wants to hear, and that they wait, patiently, across the end of one world and into the beginning of the next, until the moment finally comes when the pieces drift back toward each other, and someone, somewhere, holds two halves up to the light and realizes they were always meant to be one. The Hopi say we are living in the last days of the fourth world. They say the signs have nearly all come to pass. They say the blue star is the final one, and that when it appears, the mask comes off, and the age of the hidden thing is over. Whether or not you believe a word of it, one detail is very hard to shake. They told us, more than 60 years ago, that at the end a record would return, that the truth would come back whole, and that the only thing standing between us and it was a secret, deliberately kept, waiting to be spoken out loud in the open square. The record from 1961 may never surface. The vault, if it exists, may stay locked. But the prophecy does not actually depend on the tape. It depends on you, on whether the ones who are here at the end are willing to look at the broken pieces scattered around them, in the ground and in the archives and in the old photographs no one can explain, and finally, after 4 worlds, put them back together. The lost brother, the Hopi always said, would return from the east at the end of the age. Maybe he already has. Maybe he was never a person at all. Maybe he was the memory, coming home. And maybe the only real question left is whether anyone will still be in the room to hear it, or whether we will do what the world has always done with the ones who return at the end. Turn away, leave early, and let the mask stay on for one more age.